Hi, my name is Olivia and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be my review of Shutter Island by Dennis Lehane. As always, my reviews are completely spoiler-free, and any of the information that I discuss comes from either the Goodreads summary or the synopsis on the back of the book. Shutter Island is an adult psychological thriller that's set on an island of the same name in the 1950s. Two U.S. Marshals serve as the focal point of the novel as they travel to the island to investigate the escape of a patient and convicted murderess at the Ashcliff Hospital for the Criminally Insane. During their investigation, a hurricane blockades them on the island, preventing them from returning home and giving them the opportunity to uncover some of the dark, mysterious happenings at the hospital that weren't immediately apparent. If this plot sounds familiar, there's a fairly popular film adaptation of the book that was released in 2010, starring Leonardo DiCaprio. Over the past several years, I've created a rule for myself that I have to read a book prior to watching its film or TV adaptation. Unfortunately, I watched the Shutter Island movie shortly before I devised this rule, and I only recently decided to pick up the book. In hindsight, I wish that I had held off on watching the film until I had a chance to read the original novel. The movie was fairly true to the book, and while I had forgotten a few of the details and some of the bigger plot points, I still vividly remembered the final twist at the end of the film. The twist was identical to that in the novel, so I was already spoiled for that component of the book, but I was shocked by how little I remembered outside of that concluding twist. From page 1, I was immediately immersed in Shutter Island, and it very quickly became a 5-star read for me. I read it in a total of 3 sittings, and I likely would have breezed through it in a single sitting if I hadn't had other responsibilities at the time. Lehane brilliantly and covertly distracts readers from what's actually unfolding throughout the narrative, pulling the rug out from under them at the very last second to reveal the final plot twist that I had mentioned before. Because I watched the movie and had some basic familiarity with where the plot was headed, I spent much of the book searching for hints and clues that Lehane was dropping along the way as to where the plot was going to end up. While I managed to identify a few of these, the vast majority of them went straight over my head, and I hadn't even realized that they were significant until they were touched on later on in the book. Due to this, I quickly came to the realization that Lehane is incredibly intentional with his writing. Nothing is a coincidence, and nothing is able to be overlooked or glossed over as insignificant. This is one of the components that I love the most about his writing style, and it really sets him apart from other authors within the genre. He never spoon-feeds you the information, like many other books have fallen into the trap of doing. Instead, Lehane forces you to work for these hints, which are often misleading in their own right. This leads to a roller coaster of a read, and an incessant slew of very off-track predictions that keep you constantly guessing and always on your toes throughout this book. The concluding twist was very well written, and it was so interesting to watch all of the pieces and unanswered questions gradually fall into place. I have a soft spot for thrillers whose endings are founded in evidence and details that were revealed earlier on in the book, and Lehane certainly delivered with Shutter Island. While you may not have seen the final twist coming, everything magically clicks into place as soon as it's revealed, and things begin to make a lot more sense. The ending that Lehane decided on didn't reveal any inconsistencies or plot holes with material that had been discussed earlier in the book, which is a surprisingly common pitfall for other books within this genre. Had you correctly fit all of the puzzle pieces together as they were being revealed, you may have stumbled upon the correct twist and ending to this book, which is something that I've grown to appreciate in thrillers. I don't tend to like the completely ridiculous and outlandish endings that come completely out of left field, with no prior build-up or clues throughout the rest of the narrative as to where the novel was headed. Shutter Island's ending was the complete opposite to this, and it was one of the reasons that I so readily fell in love with this book. With that being said, the concluding 3 pages or so of the book were much more ambiguous than the ending in the film. The open-ended nature of Lehane's conclusion sparked a number of new and unanswered questions for me. But this last air of uncertainty really helped to add to the suspenseful and mysterious tone of the remainder of the book. I don't think that a more definitive, set-in-stone ending would have been able to do the rest of the narrative justice. So while the ending wasn't satisfying in the traditional sense, or what I would typically think of as a satisfying conclusion, I am very, very glad that Lehane decided on this ending. It was also immediately evident that Lehane invested considerable time and energy into conducting research before he sat down to write this book. As the summary suggests, much of this book takes place in a hospital for the criminally insane, and many of the portrayed characters are suffering from a variety of mental illnesses. Had Lehane embarked on writing this book blindly, I think it could have ended disastrously, and he wouldn't have been able to do any of these characters or psychiatric disorders any justice. Instead, he was respectfully able to craft some very realistic characters that made me feel as if I was a part of the tale and actually witnessing the events unfolding. Their words, actions, and relationships were all very believable and fell into line with what I would expect of someone in a comparable situation, which made the book that much more compelling and creepy. On a slightly different note, I also appreciated the pervasive symbolism throughout the book, especially related to water and fire, and it helped to draw the story together and create a more cohesive narrative. Some of the references to these symbols were very subtle, and I enjoyed seeking them out and trying to decipher their meaning as I went through the book. It made for an interesting scavenger hunt in the midst of an already confusing and perplexing tale, which added an additional element to the book that I felt was missing from the film adaptation. My only complaint for this book was the handful of odd metaphors and descriptions that really stood out from the rest of the narrative. One of the most prominent examples of this was Crawley's smile returned, but it was a more viscous version, and it reminded Teddy of the film that formed over soup. I have no idea what this kind of smile would look like, and I cannot readily visualize it. Anytime Crawley's character was referenced at any point after this in the book, I couldn't help but think about films forming on soups, which was not a pleasant visual and something that I wish I didn't picture every time I saw his name mentioned. I still haven't managed to decipher what exactly this means, and from what I can tell, it had nothing to do with the plot or Crawley's character. So I could have done without the constant thought of films on soups. These descriptions were thankfully few and far between, and they didn't impact my reading experience overall. Had they been more prevalent, this book definitely would have dropped down to a 4 or even 3-star rating. Even though it's only the beginning of August, I can definitively say that Shutter Island will be making it into my favorite books of 2019, and it's also earned a spot among my favorite thrillers of all time. I can't recommend this book enough, even if you've already seen the film. The novel adds so much more depth and dimension to all of the characters and the plot itself. And I appreciated Lehane's writing style and method of storytelling, which immediately captivated me and drew me into the story. Regardless of whether you're a self-proclaimed thriller lover and expert, or if you haven't read much from the genre, I would highly, highly recommend this one. It was phenomenal, and it would serve as a great introduction to the genre if it's something that you're looking into reading more of. And with that, I'm going to wrap up my review of Shutter Island. Let me know in the comments down below if you've read this book and your thoughts on it, or if you've read any of Lehane's other works. I'm looking to branch out and pick up some more of his books, but I'm not sure which one to reach for next, so let me know in the comments if you have any recommendations. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.